Welcome to the Businesstalk podcast. I am your host Deepak from India. Today we are privileged to welcome Dr. Urs Mueller, Associate Professor of Practice in the Strategy and Entrepreneurship Knowledge Group at SDA Bocconi School of Management, as our distinguished guest on today's episode. Previously, Dr. Mueller served as a lecturer at the European School of Management and Technology at Berlin, where he shaped executive education and held the role of program director for the renowned Executive Transition Program for over 10 years. His research is centered around business ethics and corporate social responsibility, with particular attention to the ethical choices in managers face, factors that drive ordinary individuals to unethical conduct, the influence of creativity on morally driven decisions, and how organizations can enhance CSR in their supply chains. Dr. Mueller engages with these subjects through scholarly articles, thought leadership in managerial media, and acclaimed case studies available through Harvard, Ivy, and the Case Center. Additionally, he brings consulting experience from his tenure at A.T. Kearney, working internationally across various industries. His teaching spans 5 continents and ranges from undergraduate to executive audiences, covering formats from small seminars to large lectures. Dr. Urs is regularly visiting lecturer at leading business schools and is widely recognized for his expertise in the case method, including his work facilitating workshops with the Case Center. He holds advanced degrees in German literature, philosophy, and art, history, and earned his doctorate from the University of Göttingen in Germany. Today, Dr. Urs Mueller shares proven method for educators and writers, inspired by his comprehensive guide, The Ultimate Case Guide, How to Successfully Teach and Write Case Studies. It's my pleasure to now welcome Dr. Urs Mueller to the conversation. Dr. Mueller, we are deeply honored by your presence and grateful for your time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Professor, in your book, you emphasize that case teaching is participant-centered. Can you explain what this means in practice and how this philosophy differs fundamentally from traditional lecture-based learning?
Yeah, I mean, lecture-based learning has a role to play in education, obviously, right? So as a knowledge input, as basically just informing students about certain things. Nevertheless, if we truly want to prepare our students for the challenges that they will face in their lives after they have graduated from any program, be it a degree program or whether they have finished an executive education program, if we truly want to prepare them for the future challenges, then we need to enable them to analyze situations and take decisions and actions. And I think this is best done by exactly exercising these two core capabilities in a classroom setting. And for me, the metaphor is that I use a lot, also in our book, we use the metaphor, is the medical education, right? I mean, this is the way in which students learn. At the beginning, they have lectures, right? That's perfectly normal. In the preclinical phase, they learn all kinds of things about, I don't know, anatomy and biochemistry. But at some point in time, the education shifts from preclinic to the clinical phase of the education, sometimes sooner, sometimes later. But then the learning happens by learning around a patient who is in the room. So there's a patient with a real problem, medical problem in the room. And now the mindset of the educator needs to change, because now the role of the educator is not to say, I'm telling you what you need to do and I'm showing you how to cut or so, but it basically allows the students to make discoveries and experiment and reflect about their own learnings while dealing with the patient. And like this, they are getting prepared to their future lives as medical doctors, because in their future lives as medical doctors, I don't know what kind of doctor we might have in mind, but maybe we have a doctor in mind who is sitting at their desk, and then the door opens every 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and a new patient walks in. And the new patient describes what the patient observes or the problems they have. And the medical doctor now needs to quickly understand what is going on and what is the adequate treatment for this problem. And this is very similar, I think, to management, right? The discipline that many of us teach, but also other domains that are maybe loosely around management or in business settings in a broader sense. Managers, they don't necessarily sit but they get an email, they get a phone call, someone walks into their office, they bump into someone at the coffee machine, they observe a certain behavior of people in the shop floor. And then every single time they need to understand what's going on and how should I react, what do I need to do, whether it is the selection of an IT system, the appraisal of an investment project, the selection of candidates for an HR management system. But in terms of the constellation, it's similar. The job of a manager is a sequence of cases, and by using cases, we prepare students to deal with exactly the challenges that they will face in the future. And that's what I mean when I talk about participant-centered. Of course, it's not my expression. It's an old expression that has been used with respect to the case method for a long period of time. Because obviously, the center of the attention now needs to move away from the educator and needs to move to the students, which also means that we need to elevate our students to eye level. It's not basically I'm talking down at students like I can do from a lectern, right? Where I might be standing on a podium and I talk down into a dark group. No, I need to elevate my students to eye level. And I need to have a constructive conversation with all of us together, because my main task is to enable the students, not to shine as I'm super smart and I can tell you all my wisdom.
Professor, you discussed the concept of building blocks in case sessions.
Mm-hmm.
How do educators determine the right sequence and number of building blocks for a single case discussion? And what's the golden rule you recommend?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I mean, obviously, attention span of students is limited. So we need to bring in certain variety every once in a while in order to recapture the attention of the students. And I typically believe that a building block in a session should maybe be something like 10, 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes if we're talking about a group assignment or so, which then, depending on the average session duration that someone might have, will determine how many building blocks you might want to have. Now, in the building blocks, I would suggest to vary the learning format. Yeah, so there might be a short lecture type of mini lecture input in a session, maybe 10 minutes. Yeah, fine. Then there's a little bit of a full class discussion. Then there's maybe a group discussion. Maybe there is a role play. Maybe there is an assignment that the students need to work on. Maybe there's an online whiteboard they need to work on. Maybe there is an online voting system that they need to work on. And by adding this type of variation to a class session, we keep the attention of the students high, and we can assure that they go through all the elements that I believe to be relevant for a learning process, which is making discoveries and then reflecting about the discoveries and linking all of that to the knowledge that the students have. And so the different building blocks would allow us to explore a case discussion by going deeper one level after the other, which I think is an important element of a case discussion. You start somewhere, and then it's a voyage of discoveries. And you scratch deeper and deeper and deeper in a case, and build it, using something like a building block logic will help you to do so.
Professor, one fascinating aspect of your guide is the balance between being prepared and remaining flexible. How should case teachers navigate the tension between having a structured teaching plan and allowing the discussion to flow organically?
Yeah, I mean, we started by discussing participant-centered learning. And if that's truly our philosophy, then our participants need to have an impact on how the discussion flows. I mean, everything else would be counterproductive, right? If I basically just follow a strict teaching plan that I might have in mind, and then a student might say something that is basically jumping ahead, and I just say, no, not now. We'll come back to that in 60 minutes or so. And we do that every single time, then we clearly signal to our students that they are not on eye level, that they don't have a clear contribution to the process in which we discuss. But we want them to be able to deal with cases by themselves. So if we do too much steering, we are basically undermining the learning objective that we have overall. So what we need is a certain amount of flexibility and going with the flow of the students. But then on the other hand, every single case in every single session, in every single course, in every single program that we have should have a learning objective. So we should have a clear idea about why do we use this case in this particular session and what should our students take away. And I think that's the point. We should be crystal clear about what is the learning objective of that particular session. What do we want our students to take away? And then keeping a lot of flexibility with respect to everything else. And then that's something that I like a lot, for example, in terms of also coming back to the conversation about building blocks, that I sometimes have this idea, okay, I want to cover topics A, B, C. I'm open to also cover D, E, F. And then whether we go through this in the sequence of C, D, A, B, or any other sequence, we do A, B, C, and then we are done, I'll keep it open. But I have a certain idea about what are the most important elements that I really want to cover. And then I keep a bit of flexibility in how I sequence it, whether I add a couple of things, whether I drop a couple of things.
Professor, given your experience teaching across 5 continents, what are the most critical cultural considerations educators must address when using case studies with diverse and multicultural participant groups?
I mean, language is obviously number one, right? I mean, the language matters, and you need to be fully aware about which language are you going to teach in, what is the native language that the participants will be speaking. And if you use a different language, for example, English, you need to be aware about how good is their English, right? Basically, yeah. So language matters because it is going to impact the contribution that participants will be making during the session. I mean, obviously, it will be much easier for native speakers to contribute fluently and actively and consistently and with precision and fast, whereas non-native speakers might sometimes be struggling to express themselves and find to have the precision in the wording. So the language is definitely one element. A second element that obviously matters is background knowledge. Okay, so different people bring different cultural knowledge and can relate to certain topics to different extents. Let me just give you maybe 2 examples. I wrote a case study about the Portuguese explorer Magellan, Magalhães. Now, that is obviously a case study that works better if I teach it with participants that are from Europe, Latin America, and/or maybe the Philippines. Everybody else will have less connection with the case, right? Because it's about an exploration, and everybody who has, some connection to this expedition will remember more about the story. It's more likely that they have heard about it, that they are aware about the cultural significance of the expedition. And another case is maybe the wonderful case study Robin Hood by Joseph Lempel. It's published in a textbook. It's not available at the case distributors. It's a very short case study about Robin Hood. Now, in certain contexts, I mean, many people on the planet know Robin Hood, but not everybody. So when you travel to certain parts of the world to teach there, then Robin Hood is just not going to work. And obviously there are also cultural sensitivities where, I don't know, you would probably not do a lot of case studies about alcohol and then use them in the Gulf region. So it's just basic cultural sensitivity where you basically try to be aware, unless it is your intentional learning objective to basically broaden the cultural perspective or provoke a discussion around sensitive issues. Then you might want to use it, but it should be a conscious choice.
Professor, you emphasize that many of the best teaching notes are little more than a list of great questions. What distinguishes truly great questions from average ones in case discussions? And how can facilitators craft questions that provoke meaningful debate?
Yeah, I think the key point is that the role of the questions is to push students to think further, to think deeper, to go beyond the obvious, yeah, to challenge students. And that's, I think, the main role that we have. So this could be all kinds of stimulation. It could be, I don't know, to ask them for additional options, for 3 levels of validation, for proof that for the things that they can find in the case, the evidence that they have for their positions. Essentially, sometimes people, I mean, obviously, from a biological perspective, that's not true, but the brain is sometimes considered to be analogous to a muscle. If you don't use it, it's not going to improve. But if you stretch your brain, if you constantly challenge yourself, you're going to get better. And that's, I think, the key role of a good question. To challenge the most obvious things sometimes. And I don't know. I mean, I teach business ethics. One of the questions that I absolutely love is to ask my students, what is a company? I mean, I think it can hardly get more fundamental, but it's one of these questions that even business students very rarely think about. I mean, what is a company? We take it for totally granted. We are surrounded by companies. Even I see in the logos of all the podcast providers, and where this is going to be shown, and Spotify, and then all of these are companies. What is Spotify, right? And I think that's what we want. We want our students to be challenged and think further. Now, how do you come up with good questions? I think that's not a science, that's partially an art, right? I think you should be sitting at your desk first, wondering about what is my learning objective? Always keep your learning objective in mind, and then ask yourself which questions will allow me to get to this learning objective. And then you need to test these questions in class. Obviously, some questions might not work. That's what you then will realize when you test them in class. There might be other questions that come to your mind as you teach, and you should absolutely, after the session, quickly write them down so that you keep them for the next time if they work very well. And nowadays, obviously, we have a great tool. We have AI, right? If we are talking about a case that you authored by yourself, and then we have no copyright issues if you decide to upload the case and say, ChatGPT, please prepare 10, 15, 100 questions. And then you need to make a selection, obviously. Yeah? So AI doesn't take away the thinking, but it can help you with coming up with questions that you might not have thought about.
Professor, the use of boards and flip charts is a recurring theme in your book. Can you walk us through a concrete example of how strategic board planning actually shapes participant learning and discussion outcomes?
Yeah. I mean, what we need to make sure is sometimes when you see novice case teachers, sometimes they use the board and then it's pretty much like it's a random graffiti, right? They take random notes here and there, but that's the main purpose of a good board plan is that it allows you to structure the conversation over the entire session or maybe even beyond. Okay. And the way in which you will do so will probably depend very much on the role of the case for the very specific session. So, for example, I don't know, to take an example that everybody will understand, if you have familiarized your students with the 5 forces, and then you discuss a case, then you will obviously ask your students to basically discuss the strategic context and environment of a company around the 5 forces, and you will basically use the graphical component of the 5 forces to gradually fill the board. What I like to do a lot in several of my cases to use a more kind of an inductive approach where I basically collect arguments, I already have in mind the structure that I will come up with. And then after the discussion, quickly explain what was the meaning behind the structure. I obviously teach ethics. One key differentiation in normative ethical theory is between the non-consequentialist schools of thought and the consequentialist schools of thought. So quite often I will basically write down key arguments that are being made in an ethical discussion, and then I will later explain, okay, here I collected all the arguments that I believe to be more non-consequentialist in nature, and here I collected all the arguments that I believe to be more consequentialist in nature. Yeah, but I do that kind of in hindsight. Yeah, and this is also a good way in which, you know, we talked earlier about the building blocks and students that jump with respect to the flexibility. Yeah, so if you have made up your mind about the building blocks, you can basically absolutely acknowledge a student that is jumping ahead, introduces something, yeah, and then if you already know where in your board you have in mind to cover a certain topic, then you can just already put it there and say, any more ideas, you come back to the other things, and then you go back to this point that was mentioned earlier and say, okay, kudos to the student who had already in mind that we also need to discuss this. Let's come back to this issue. And this is a good way in which you can structure a conversation, I believe, and exactly maintain this flexibility between what you have planned in mind and how the discussion goes with respect to the students.
Professor, how should instructors handle the practical challenges of participants arriving unprepared? And what long-term implications does this have for the learning contract you establish with students?
Yeah. Yeah, that's obviously a key challenge, and I think every person who has ever tried to use a case in class knows this feeling that you want to discuss a case, you're totally excited, you come in, and then you realize that a significant portion of your students didn't read the case. What to do now? And I think in this particular case, you're typically facing a trade-off, right? Where you need to consider that the fact that there are short-term fixes that you can do right now in order to rescue that particular session, many of which have, exactly as you anticipated, a long-term impact on the learning contract and the way in which you collaborate in the future. And that needs to be balanced, obviously. If, for example, a standard strategy that I see over and over is that if educators realize students didn't read the case, they will say, okay, no problem, I summarized the case. Okay, or you have 5 minutes, you read the case now. That's great because it's going to rescue the session in that particular moment. But of course, it will long-term reduce the probability of students reading the case for the next session and the session after and session after. So in a situation like this, educators need to make a choice about what kind of short-term benefit and what kind of long-term sacrifice. How do they want to balance these two? And the decision will probably depend very much on the context in which a case is being used. I don't know if you're doing an executive education program and it's just half a day and you only have one case. So then obviously you will go for the rescue of the session and ignore the possible long-term impact. Whereas if you teach a full semester with, 20 sessions or even more, and the first session you realize your students didn't prepare, then you might want to take different actions. So that's, I think, the first thing. And then when it comes to the longer term perspective, I tend to basically cluster these into carrot and stick strategies. I am personally more a carrot person, but of course there are stick technologies. Yeah? So stick strategies long term would be, for example, asking students to write case write-ups, to grade these case write-ups, to have an entry test, to tell students to basically do a lot of cold calling at the beginning of the class, punishing those that didn't read the case. I've heard from colleagues who, I've never tried anything like this, but to tell students that didn't read the class to leave the room or at least sit in the back. Yeah, so you basically rearrange the room and say, you didn't read the case, you are allowed to stay in, but you sit in the back and you're not allowed to contribute. And I will focus my conversation on those that are sitting in the front. All of that would be kind of more stick strategies. More carrot strategies are using shorter cases that make it easier for students to read the cases that are more accessible in terms of language, jargon, case difficulty, complexity, cases that are more exciting, maybe, that have really an interesting question, cases that are more relatable to our students because they deal with constellations that they can anticipate, right? So many cases, for example, discuss CEO perspectives. Well, that's maybe exciting, but on the other hand, it's absolutely not relatable because most of our students will not leave our institutions and immediately be CEOs. So if you have a case that is more relatable, that might make it more easy or more likely that they will read the case in the first place. And if you show that discussing the case is fun, but that the pre-requirement for the case reading, for the case discussion is that they read the case, they are just more likely to read the case in the next session.
Professor, let me ask you the question about the grades. How should educators effectively evaluate and grade case-based courses while maintaining the exploratory, discovery-focused nature of case learning, rather than reducing it right or wrong answers?
Yeah. Now, there are obviously different philosophical approaches. But a thing that I do, and I might be a bit hair-splitting about the terminology here, is many colleagues teach in-class participation. I grade contribution. So in all of my courses in which I grade, because I do also do executive education where I don't grade, and I sometimes have classes that are more pass-fail as opposed to getting an individual grade. But for cases in which I grade, I will always add a contribution grade in which I'm not going to evaluate whether people come up with the right or wrong answer, where I'm not going to grade how often they say something, but I will grade how much what someone says in the classroom or does in even if it's an asynchronous course in a discussion forum maybe or something like this, how much an individual student helps the entire class to learn, because that's why we have an institution, right? This is why we have a case discussion as a group, because there is this mutual learning from one another in a case debate, especially if students disagree, right? So the level of respectful disagreement that students bring in by basically challenging each other's perspectives, that's what I will grade, and not so much whether an answer is right or wrong. But that's kind of for the in-class interaction. Of course, we can also use cases for all kinds of other elements of grading, right? We can ask students to write case write-ups before they come to the session. We can grade those. It's maybe not the most effective way of doing it in the times of AI. We can ask students at the end of a course and basically use a case-based exam, give them a case and ask them to write in some sort of an essay or exam after the class. We can do that by allowing them to do that as a take-home exam and open book, or we can ask them to do it in a classroom closed book, yeah, however we want to do it. If we grade students on basis of cases, I tend to be of the opinion that indeed we should avoid grading right and wrong, as you just pointed out, because for me, a good case study is not necessarily about right or wrong, but the main effect of the case study is the exploration, right? Is how good is an analysis, is I think often the more relevant element than do they at the end culminate in a recommendation that is equivalent to what the company might have done or so. So a good case is not necessarily a quiz. It's a journey of discovery. It's an expedition for me. And this is also the way in which I tend to grade student assignments, obviously you need to have a grading rubric where you try to break it down. But for me, there it's more kind of how reflective is something, how well is it connected to the theories, tools, frameworks, etc., discussed in the classroom, how solid is the argumentation, and not so much whether someone proposes to do A over B or B over A.
Professor, your book uniquely connects teaching and writing case studies. How does actually teaching a case in the classroom fundamentally improve and reshape how an educator would write or refine that same case?
Yeah, I think maybe the easier way is to talk about the impact of teaching on writing. I think writing a good case for educational purposes needs educational experience. So you need to have made the experience of teaching. And I typically recommend in case writing workshops that you don't write a case unless you want to use it for yourself and unless you have a very clear idea about what you want to use it for. If you have a very clear idea what you want to use it for, then absolutely write a case. Okay, so in that sense, the teaching needs to inform the writing because otherwise the writing is going to be everywhere. And one of the observations that I've made when I coach less experienced novice case authors is that they are unfocused in their case writing. Their case writing is everywhere and they're getting distracted by all the interesting things that happen in a company. It's a bit like someone standing in a meadow and there are just too many butterflies to see. Yeah, if you enter a company and then you see, oh my God, this is going on and that is going on, and then the case is getting overloaded. So teaching is absolutely key to writing. I, however, also believe that the other way is true, right? If you want to be an excellent case teacher, sometimes writing can actually be a very good complement. And I believe that my personal teaching has benefited from my writing because once you write a case, and especially the teaching note, it forces you to be specific, right? It does force you exactly to write down, what do I really want from this session? It forces you to challenge some of your own assumptions, to think about how can I do it better, etc. And so, for example, several of my case studies, I wrote the case, I wrote a first draft of the teaching note, most importantly, obviously, the teaching plan and with the list of questions and the kind of timings and the building blocks, and of course, the board plan. And then over time, you use the case over and over and over again, and you refine it, and you are getting more precise as to what this case is all about. And this is helping my teaching of that case, but at the same time, it will improve the case before I publish it because the last version that I will then use will have all these experiences included in the teaching note. Yeah, so I really believe it's something that helps both sides.
Professor, I'd like to conclude this episode with one last question.
Mhm.
You address the role of technology and media in case classrooms.
Yeah.
What's your perspective on balancing technological tools with the interactive human engagement that case method demands?
Yeah. I mean, let me come back to the metaphor of the patient in the room that we used at the very beginning. Let's assume there is this robot and the robot can do a surgery excellently. I mean, brilliant and maybe even better than a human person. I think we would fail as medical educators if we wouldn't expose our students to the wonders of this machine. So at some point in time, allowing our students to experiment with such a machine and to see what's the best way of interacting between the robot and the human in the medical classroom is absolutely key. On the other hand, if it's maybe about, I don't know, it's just a stitching machine, yeah, it does only define the stitches. I believe that the medical students still need to know what is a good stitching, right? And how to do it by themselves. And like this, they can see if the robot is doing a good job or not. So our students need to be able to do it without the technology, at least to some level, and they need to know what the machine can do, and they need to work about the collaboration. And the same is true for us in management. I believe, because our students eventually will use technology in their jobs, that we are failing if we disallow our students to use technology. So I'm absolutely in favor of not only allowing, maybe even requiring our students to make use of the most advanced technology that is there on the planet, selectively. Yeah, and that's I guess the key point. For which kind of activities do we want our students to use technology, and what technology, and what do we want to be left to human judgment and what not? And I think that needs to be a very conscious choice. And I personally, I embrace it as much as I can, and I love it, and I use it every single day, even though I see all the horrors around AI, for example. If we just talk about AI, I teach an entire course on AI ethics. But at the same time, for example, AI has allowed me to develop new technologies that will enhance my teaching. So I just finished, for example, using various AI tools to develop a web page. I'm not a coder. I cannot code. I'm not a developer. But with the help of AI, I was able to develop a tool that will group students according to disagreement. So students respond to a set of statements, and they can say, I'm very much in agreement or very much against it. And then the tool will, there are different versions of it, but there are essentially what the tool will do, it will form groups of students that disagree as much as possible to maximize the disagreement in the overall class. And like this, I can use the differences of opinions of my students about a certain topic so that they can learn from one another, which I believe to be key, especially in our times of filter bubbles and, I don't know, political divide and these kind of things. I want my students to be able to bridge the divides and to be able to talk with one another. And this is just an example where I use AI actively in order to enhance the interaction in the classroom, which otherwise I would not have been able to do. I mean, in the good old times before that, yes, you can regroup them, you can have a vote and then say, now we do all the yeses discussed with all the no's or so. But now I can do it obviously significantly more nuanced with significantly larger classes. And that's just one example of how I believe that technology absolutely is a key factor, and we need the human-to-human interaction in the classroom. But we need, I don't know, things like interactive whiteboards and online surveys and simulations and the technological opportunities are there, and our students will need to know about them.
Thank you, Professor Mueller, for your insightful, thoughtful, and for sharing your valuable experiences with us today. It has been a privilege to learn from your expertise on case teaching and writing. We look forward to welcoming you again in the future. Thank you, listeners, for joining us today's episode. We appreciate your time and look forward to bringing you more insightful conversations soon. Thank you once again, Dr. Urs Mueller.
Thank you so much.